It's time for the best coverage of the top stories in sports. The Sports Wrap with Jason Page starts now.
Yes, it does. Thank you for being with us. Thank you, Chad Erickson. Lots to do over the next 60 minutes. Back in our Las Vegas studios after a week back east. We now resume your regularly scheduled programming. Bill Bender will join us from the Sporting News to talk college football for a couple of segments. That's coming up in 10 minutes. What a wild college football weekend it was. I almost led with college football, Sam Yarnell. I almost did it. But it's the NFL, of course, coming off a weekend of football, a Thursday, a Friday, a Sunday. And let's run through some of the top games from the weekend. We'll do as much NFL as we can in the show this week or on this Monday. Obviously, we'll have some leftovers on Tuesday as well. But, Sam, let's start with the Bills and what an effort they put out at home against a Niners team that, look, here's what I'll say about the Niners, and we can get more into them later on. I've saved some time for them a little later on in the show. But what I can say right now about this Bills team is they came out there last night. They looked like a team that was prepared for that kind of weather. Josh Allen continues to write his MVP resume. On a wild night from a weather perspective. They thought the bad stuff wasn't going to really come until the second half of this game. It was snowing all night. It looked like a giant snow globe. And the Bills doing what you would expect them to do against a Niners team that just hasn't been able to put it all together this year and has had a lot of injury problems.
Yeah, you're exactly right, Jason. Now I will begin my minute to gloat about Josh Allen, the superhero unicorn that he is. My goodness, the minus better than 2-1 at every house in Vegas favorite to win the most valuable player award in the NFL this season. And that's because he is. We told you here on the Sports Wrap before the season started that he was going to be the most valuable player in the NFL this year. And last night was, I don't want to say his coming out party because he's been in the top 3 since week 2, but it was an expose of his greatness, we'll say. Yeah, sure, I could tell you the stat about how Josh Allen over the last 6 weeks has as many receiving touchdowns now as Justin Jefferson does, or how over the course of this season, Josh Allen now has 1 fewer receiving touchdown than Travis Kelce. Those are all true, but the fact of the matter is, you've seen against both of the teams that played in the Super Bowl last year, over the course of the last 3 weeks, Josh Allen single-handedly went out there and won the game for his team. That is what an MVP does. That is why he will win that award this year, barring injury. Listen, if we're going to have a conversation about listen, the only 2 MVPs in Bills history have been running backs. I am all for the running back winning the MVP award.
I'm just saying there's a lot of weeks left. I'm just saying there's enough weeks left that things could happen, even barring injury. Even barring injury, there are things that could happen.
If he starts to play every game this season like his worst game of his career, then yes. And if the Bills go, 0-5, 1-4, in a span where they have to play the Patriots twice, then yeah, he probably shouldn't win MVP. Jason, you're right. But if he continues to play with any ilk of what he's played with this year, Josh Allen, maybe your unanimous MVP in the National Football League. Listen, the Bills are playing complete football. Matt Milano played his first game all season yesterday. And quite frankly, looks kind of like a non-factor, which is unfortunate, and they can address in the weeks to come.
It's just one game.
But that defense still stepped up against an offense that got a lot of their pieces back and looked pretty ready to go into that game. I mean, you had George Kittle finally healthy. You thought Christian McCaffrey was finally healthy, and we can get into that now. Deebo Samuel, the production still isn't there. A couple of really bad drops over the middle. And Brock Purdy has regressed severely this season. I don't know when we're going to start having that conversation, but Brock Purdy is just not the same quarterback that took this team to past the NFC Championship game into the Super Bowl last season.
All right. He's real quick, because I want to get to Eagles-Ravens. He's missing some of the components. I think this team has always been built on the sum of its parts. And a lot of those parts have been missing this year for the Niners, so I'm not going to go crazy on the Brock Purdy stuff. We'll address the Christian McCaffrey conversation a little later in the show when we talk more about the Niners. Eagles-Ravens. And look, I will keep making the argument that Saquon Barkley is just as valuable, if not more valuable than anybody in this league, and he continued to show it yesterday in a showdown with the guy that you said should be the offensive player of the year. And Barkley clearly took that narrative and ran with it. And I'm sure he heard people like you saying, well, is it him? Is it Derrick Henry? Is it any of these other guys? Saquon Barkley continues to perform at a super high level. We can talk about the Ravens a little bit more later because I've lumped them in with the Niners in terms of having a conversation about them a little later in the show. But look, I think we owe some apologies here to the Philadelphia Eagles at this point, who are starting to look like that team that a lot of people were expecting at the start of the year. And now, have some wins on their resume that have to make you open your eyes and say, maybe there is a challenger to Detroit.
No, since that loss to the Bucs, they've been playing like the best team in the NFL. The problem is they've been playing like the best team in the NFL against the Browns, Giants, Bengals, Jaguars, Cowboys, Commanders, Rams, and Ravens. So realistically, there's one, maybe two, you could max argue 2.5 out of those 8 wins in this streak that are really valuable. And I'm just counting off the top of my head.
Sam, hold on. They're all valuable. We have to stop this conversation of good wins, bad wins. I said this.
No,
I said this
sure.
Weeks ago.
In the perspective of the playoffs and the grand scheme of the NFL, you're right. But when we're having the argument for who is the best team in the NFL, that is what it comes down to, because these teams haven't all played each other. Specifically, the Eagles and Lions haven't. Again, back to my point, right? There are 1, 2, I'm counting live on air here, three of those games are wins by more than one score. I understand that the Eagles have been playing really well, and I would put them right up there with the Lions as 1A, 1B in the NFC. No question in my mind. But this narrative that's developed that they're the best team in football to me is just a little bit too much of a stretch, don't you think?
Look. I still think the Lions.
Hold on. I think them as the NFC champions today.
No. I mean, look, that's hyperbolic. That's prisoner to the moment stuff. We expect that. And we don't generally get into that sort of thing. But if I'll still say the Lions are the best team in the NFC. I just think they got company up there now. I think Philadelphia can, in a 4-quarter game, the history of that Lions franchise weighing on their shoulders, I think it's all a factor. All right, we got more NFL to do later on. College football next. We welcome you back to this Monday edition of Sports Wrap. Back in the comfy confines of our Las Vegas studios. And we say hello to our friend Bill Bender, who hangs out with Sam and I, talk some college football. I mean, not that there is anything to really get into, Bill. With the Sporting News, who does a terrific job, and he was at the, I don't know, what will they call this years from now? When it came to the Pacers, what was that, Pacers Pistons, the Malice at the Palace years ago, which Sam was probably like 4 years old when it happened. Bill, maybe. Bill was probably closer to my age when it happened. Bill, what did we see in Ann Arbor, and what was your big takeaway from Michigan and Ohio State and everything that transpired?
Well, I mean, the Malice in the Palace the following day, there was arguably the worst brawl in college football history when Clemson and South Carolina had their fight. I don't know if you remember that. That was the following day that year. And this is a distraction from what happened on the field, but we'll talk about this distraction. It's absurd. Michigan, you don't need to plant the flag. You did that 2 years ago. I think the practice of planting a flag, you're going to invite these kind of things to happen. Ohio State didn't need to react the way they did. But keep in mind that on the montage of Ohio State-Michigan rivalry lore, what do they always show? 3-4 highlights in, Ohio State players tearing down the Michigan banner in 1973. It's like one of the most beloved moments in rivalry history. But I'm glad the Big Ten fined both schools. I wish they would suspend some players for the bowl games. This was an epidemic on Saturday across a couple other schools. It's epidemics, maybe a stretch, but enough's enough.
Is that going to be the fallout from this? Is basically you're going to have conferences say no more flag planting. I mean, that's it.
Yep.
It's got to be. You can't do it. We can't have fun things anymore. You can't do these things because if you do, it's going to lead to this sort of chaos where you've got police pepper spraying players. Right. Mass hysteria.
Yeah, and it's, again, a distraction from what we watched on the field, which is probably Ohio State's most embarrassing loss since I would go as far to say 1996 when Michigan beat them 13-9. I remember that game. It was very similar. Michigan won that game on one play. Michigan controlled the tempo. Michigan was content to run 3 yards in a cloud of dust, quite literally, and complete a few passes, and their defense did the rest. I don't understand Ohio State's game plan. They ran 17 times at 2 NFL defensive tackles that are going to play on Sunday for a decade. And I think they just tried to out-man ball Michigan, and it didn't work. And they played right into the Wolverines' hands. The toxicity levels here in Columbus today, Jason, are very, very high.
Davis Warren had fewer passing attempts in this game than Will Howard had completions. It really was just run it down your throat all day long. But, Bill, you talk about this being the worst loss since the 90s, potentially, in the eyes of Ohio State. Everything, the fallout immediately after this game ended, I saw online was, all right, Ryan Day's got to go. Do you think that's the answer? And if so, coaching, is Mike Vrabel coming back to his alma mater to be the head coach?
I don't think Ryan Day's going anywhere. But next year, it'll be a next year, you've got to beat these guys type deal because they are in the playoff. They could win a playoff game or two. I don't know that they can win the national. What if they win the national title? I mean, that's kind of you have a national championship caliber team that is the only team projected to be in the playoff field that lost their rivalry game. The other being Clemson, who could backdoor in if they beat SMU. So it's a psychological test in a lot of ways here. How do you react to losing? You saw players crying. Cody Simon crying. He apologized to the media, and I'm thinking, why are you apologizing to me? You owe me nothing. You're the player. You're the one out there putting it on the line. It was bizarre. As for Day, the other alternative would be maybe he resigns at some point. Maybe he takes another job. Mm-hmm. That could happen. Mike Vrabel's not coming to Columbus. I think he's an NFL coach. Marcus Freeman's an interesting discussion to me. But Marcus Freeman loves Notre Dame. So they're in a tough spot.
Give me a thought on Michigan figuring out a way with zero offense whatsoever, without a quarterback, figuring out a way, what it means for that program, what it means for this coach, as embattled as this whole season and how as this staff has been this year. The fallout from everything Harbaugh that sort of trickled into this regime, what it meant for Michigan to get this kind of win.
Two ways to think about it. I mean, one, you could say, hey, they went 7-5. Then you could look at their schedule and say, flip their schedule with Indiana. What do you think Michigan's record would have been? They had to play Texas. They had to play Oregon. They had to play Indiana. They had to play on the road at Washington, a game they could have won. On the road at Illinois, who finished 9-3. They had a brutal schedule. So I give them credit, Sharon Moore credit, for being smart. Essentially, knowing what he had, being self-aware of the offense. Does that work 9 out of 10 times? Probably not. And again, I can't reiterate this enough. The two best players on that football field were probably Kenneth Grant and Mason Graham. Here's a stat for you guys. Ohio State ran between the tackles 17 times for 41 yards. One of those carries was 17 yards. So the other 16 runs between the tackles went for 24 yards. And they thought that was a good idea. Mason Graham is unbelievable, Jason. He'll play in the NFL for a decade.
Bill, real quick, obviously the fallout from this game, Ohio State out of the Big Ten championship. It's Oregon, Penn State. Does Penn State have a chance, or is Oregon just that kind of a juggernaut?
No, I think they have a chance because their front seven's really good. Drew Aller completing over 75% of his passes, 6 touchdowns, no interceptions since the Ohio State game. They've been there before. James Franklin, but here we go. James Franklin, big game, 0-5 as an underdog in his last 5 tries, straight up, covered the spread once. The Ducks are pretty good. I think Oregon does go across the country. The running game works. I don't think it's a blowout. I think this will be a fun, tight game. But, there's a possibility real quick. Yeah. Oregon, Arizona State, SMU, Texas, all in new conferences, could sweep the conference championship games this weekend.
It's a pretty good note. It's a good note. We're going to bring Bill back for one more segment. We have bolted him to the chair. We'll get his thoughts on a whole host of other results from the weekend in college football. So we continue the conversation on this Monday edition of Sports Wrap. A lot of football still to get to as we continue. Don't go anywhere. We'll get back to the NFL in 10 minutes. Plenty to dive into there. We just scratched the surface at the top of the show. We continue the college football conversation with our friend Bill Bender of the Sporting News, who hangs out with us on this Monday following one of the wildest college football weekends I could ever remember. I was sitting in hotel lobbies and airports consuming it on Saturdays. I was getting ready to travel back from the NYC to Las Vegas. So I want to get your thoughts on what we saw with this 8 overtime game with Georgia and Georgia Tech, Bill. And a lot of it is being consumed by the idea of the overtime system and the way it works. But just talk about it from the perspective of Georgia Tech finding a way again. It's almost feels like the Chiefs a little bit. We've seen it in multiple instances this year with this Georgia team where they're not playing their best football. We know about the struggles defensively, and we saw what Georgia Tech was able to do, racking up some points in that game. But give me your take on sort of the biggest takeaways from that Georgia win.
That Chiefs comparison's really good. I had not even thought about that because, in the first half, they don't even look like a playoff team. They look like a 6-6 team most of the time. And then the second half, they look like a national title team. As for the overtime, Brent Key could have saved us a lot of trouble by going for 2 right away on the road. Just take your swing and go. Now, we can second guess all we want because we had to watch. I think coaches have about 3 or 4 go-to plays, and you could tell, right? Because once they got through overtime 5 through 9, the plays were not overly great. Georgia missed a couple opportunities. I do think the Bulldogs, they made a production of telling us that Georgia was in the playoff after every turn in this game, but it took away from what was probably the best game of the weekend. I do think Georgia is in. I think they're a dangerous team, but they're also a candidate. They could easily, depending on matchup, get bounced in the first round.
Bill, by the way, just to your point about coaches having a few of the same plays they like to run, Haynes King with 413 yards of offense in this game and 5 total touchdowns. Just crazy stuff from the Georgia Tech quarterback. Bill, the overtime system in college football is something that we're not unfamiliar with reform throughout, right? We just saw it a couple of years ago after that insane 7 or 9 overtime game in 2021. Do you think that an instance like this, where overtime's 5 through 8, it really felt like it was just as valuable as a coin toss, like the old NFL format that we would complain about, where whoever won the coin toss won a game? It kind of came down to that with the back and forth 2-point conversions, and it seemed like there was a little bit of fallout around the new overtime system. Do you think that they'll try to look at any sort of way to change that going forward?
It's a great question. I liked the old way. I like the NFL overtime, honestly. I think you could do NFL overtime in college and get away with it. Pat Forty even suggested, should we go back to regular season ties? And I didn't hate it. I can tell you I didn't hate it. Hockey has ties in the regular season. So it would change the way you coach at the end of games. There's no question. So I think all of those options are on the table. To me, maybe just keep going from the 25-yard line instead of the 35. You just possession by possession, 25. Eventually a kicker will miss. I think the exception to the rule is these 7, 8, 9 overtime games. The 2-point conversion, it doesn't do it for me. It is very entertaining, but it seems like anticlimactic when you have a player play like Haynes King did.
Syracuse, the rally at the they don't call it the Carrier Dome anymore. I don't know what they call it, but the rally at home against Miami. How stunning was that?
Kyle, we talked about that last week. Kyle McCord was hot at home. What a redemption arc for him. He's the guy that was at the center of the Ohio State-Michigan finish last year, throws an interception, and I had buddies texting me, I wish we had McCord while they lose to Michigan. Then they watch Kyle McCord beat Miami and light him up doing it. I think Miami's out, maybe. I mean, what do you guys think? This last argument, it's coming tomorrow night. Alabama, Miami. Miami, 2 losses. Played with fire a couple times. We talked about them all year. Alabama, 3 losses. We know who the committee's taking in that one. I don't care what your opinion is. I already know the answer. They're going to take Alabama in that case, right or wrong.
Listen, as much as I think it should be Miami, you're right. It's going to end up being Alabama. I asked earlier about the job security of Ryan Day losing that big game. Mario Cristobal losing this big game in a team where he very much had a lot of talent riddled throughout that team all season long. And they were very shaky. This was not the first game where it didn't look like they were going to win. Bill, I'm curious, your thoughts on the outlook for Mario Cristobal at Miami?
He's doing a great job. I mean, Cam Ward was nice, but they're just not quite there yet. People, when they watch Miami and they have a little bit of success, you immediately flash your mind back to when Jason and I were watching those 90s teams dominate, early 2000s teams dominate. And it's such a false narrative because they're a program building. I thought Cam Ward had a fantastic season, but they were about what a best case scenario was, 10-2. Maybe get in. And, I'm very impressed with some things they do, but the defense just wasn't quite there yet. That was a tough matchup. We saw it coming a little bit, and Kyle McCord got the job done. So it sets up an SMU Clemson ACC championship game. Dabo Swinney, by the way, 8-1 in that one. 8-1 in the ACC championship game. So Clemson, like we said last week, could backdoor in after losing to their rival.
Bill, I got about a minute here. Notre Dame wins. Talk about them. You can talk about SMU, Arizona State, of who's playing the best college football right now headed into next week.
Notre Dame and Texas, I think. Texas defense is really good. I don't care about the score. Their defense is going to keep them in every game. Ohio State's defense is going to keep them in every game. Notre Dame is playing probably the best complementary football of those 3 teams you mentioned. Running the ball, going out to USC, that's normally a tough game for them. They have been dominant. If you scratch that Northern Illinois thing off their schedule and just looked at the rest, I know that's a big leap. I understand. It's huge, but look at the other 11 games and tell me that's not the best team in the country. And even in that game, their defense is one of the best defenses in the country. So Irish hype is coming. They're going to get a home game. I think they're going to make a run.
Bill Bender of the Sporting News. Check him out on all things football over there. We talk to him every Monday on the college football. Bill, always appreciate it, my friend. One of the wildest weekends in college football I could ever recall watching. Always appreciate it.
Yeah, talk to you guys next Monday. Thanks so much.
Right. We're coming back. Lots more sports wrap. Back to the NFL when we return. Sports Wrap continues on this Monday. Let's get back to the NFL after a college football interlude. Sam Yarnell rejoins us. Couple of teams I want to focus on, Sam. Something to consider coming up in 10 minutes. Talk about the Trevor Lawrence concussion. Also get into Matt Eberflus's ouster from last Friday. All right, are the Niners finished? We talked about the Bills win earlier in the show. I want to focus on it more from the Niners' perspective. In a division that is still meh, but the McCaffrey injury is certainly excuse me, the McCaffrey injury is certainly something that has to be considered. But here's what I'll say about that. And for those that don't know, they're talking about it being a PCL injury. Looks like he's done for the year. And we can get into the long term on what all this means for Christian McCaffrey, who's had an injury-riddled career, and all of that. We can get into that at a different time. But from the perspective of the Niners, are they done when you look at that NFC West? Is there any argument you can make, Sam, for them being able to still be a factor out there and potentially win that division?
It's interesting, Jason. First of all, those of you watching, consuming this show probably know more about the McCaffrey injury than we do now. He's undergoing the MRI as we tape this show. So, obviously, I as much as I want to say a lot hinges on that, I think the Niners, they're not better off without him. But
Jordan Mason.
I know. I always want to call him Trey Mason, who college football fans, of course, remember.
Yeah.
Jordan Mason and Isaac Guerendo proved in his absence this year, and McCaffrey's absence this is, when he was over in Germany doing all the stuff with his Achilles. Yeah. They're like sustainable running backs in that system. Like, I think that's fair to say about them. So I think they'll be fine regardless of the McCaffrey thing, as weird as that sounds. They need to maintain that O-line, because that O-line is really the strength. And we talk about that season in and season out. And when they struggled a lot this year is when Trent Williams, their all-pro, all-world, probably future Hall of Fame left tackle, has struggled with injury. I think the key moment for the Niners, I'm not completely ready to write them off in that division yet, because it's the Niners and because it's the NFC West. That in their season comes down to the Rams game in 2 weeks, right? Like, they can probably handle the Bears this coming week. The Rams game, December 12th in prime time. So December 12th is a Thursday. So that'll be Thursday night in prime time. I think that is the game that their season hinges upon.
Yeah, I'll go with that. And look, I don't think anybody's ready to crown Geno Smith and the Seahawks as division champions yet. I do still think there is time with 5 games remaining for this Niners team to put things together. I just think it's one of those years. And the problem is, you talk about windows, and that's one of the things we've always talked about with this Niners group as they've gone year after year here. And tickled the fancy of fans with this idea of being able to win a Super Bowl, was that the window was going to close at some point. Now with the McCaffrey injury, some will argue that window just closed a little bit more. You see some of the continued injuries that this team has had to sustain as the window closed a little bit more. The good news for them is nobody else in that division, and I know Kyler Murray's had a nice season this year, despite the fact they've lost a couple of games in a row. It's been a nice bounce-back year for him. Nobody's going to go crazy about anybody in that division, so they're always going to have a shot to come out of that division. That's kind of my sense with the talent that is still assembled here. I just wonder, and you mentioned it, and I was going to actually talk about the same thing. The numbers with and without McCaffrey from a production standpoint at the running back position have actually been better without him. So I don't think right now that that's going to be the determining factor as to why or why not the Niners don't wind up in the playoffs. We'll see what happens over the final 5 games. Justin Tucker, here's an interesting question. We could go into the, should the Ravens go a different direction at the kicker spot? And I think they should at this point. Because, again, you're talking about windows and the opportunity to grab that brass ring being right there for this Ravens team. And we could get into them losing at home to Philadelphia yesterday. Lamar Jackson really not doing a heck of a lot in that game, really shutting down a Ravens offense that we thought was spectacular throughout much of the year. But here's an even bigger question when it comes to Justin Tucker that I want to bring up. Is he now looking at a situation where this season is so bad where it ruins his shot for making the Hall of Fame someday? Because this has been that bad of a season. And the slip off of the cliff has been so huge that it makes me wonder, on a team that's expected to contend and costing them potentially an opportunity to contend, is it something where this costs him a shot at the Hall of Fame?
There would have to be severe recency bias, and here's why. Justin Tucker could lose the Ravens every game for the rest of their season, and he would still have won them 20 more games with his leg than he had lost them. That stat alone puts you in the Hall of Fame. Listen, I know that everyone's freaking out about Justin Tucker, and the stat that you're going to see is the Ravens' losses this year have come by a combined 22 points, and Justin Tucker has 22 points worth of missed field goals in those losses. Sure, that's all fine. The fact of the matter is this. Justin Tucker is hitting 95% of his extra points this season. That's still above league average, and every single one of his field goal misses is from 40 plus yards. It's not like he's missing cupcake kicks and just shanking them.
In a year, though, where kickers have been doing extraordinary things, he's really struggled. We're coming back. SportsWrap continues on this Monday. Odds and Ends wraps it up in about 10 minutes. Passing of a historic figure in college basketball this weekend. Also talk about tonight's Monday Night Football matchup. All right, Sam Yarnell, something to consider: the hit laid upon Trevor Lawrence by Azeez Al-Shaair in yesterday's Texans-Jaguars game. It obviously concussed, and anybody who just saw it on our screen, it obviously concussed Trevor Lawrence, knocked him out of the game. We'll see how long he's out of action. He is posting on social media that he was already feeling much better. We'll see where all that leads. But the hit by Al-Shaair and the reaction to it, obviously a huge fight on the field. After that, a lot of people going after Al-Shaair. And look, here's the bottom line. There is no place in the league for this kind of hit. Knowing what we know, the rules being what they are, if this was 2 or 3 years ago, and we're talking about players having to adjust to the speed of the game and guys sliding and trying to avoid launching yourself at players, I get it. There is no place for that kind of hit. And I know he put out a statement on Monday morning saying he was sorry and people don't know what's in his heart. And, he didn't mean to hurt Trevor Lawrence. But this is a guy in week 2 that took a swing at Roschon Johnson. And so there is obviously a history here in terms of behavior. And he's saying he's getting racist. People are sending racist things his way. People are sending Islamophobic things his way. I'm not talking about any of that. I'm just talking about it from a pure football standpoint. The league has to make a statement if it cares about player safety. He has to be suspended. And I don't even know if 1 game is enough for the kind of hit he laid on Trevor Lawrence yesterday.
I will just say I do care about the racist and Islamophobic things. I denounce those. Those are bad. I don't care what somebody did. There's no reason to do that to anybody. But yeah, so I personally, this is all personal belief, I like to kind of gauge whether something was fair or foul based on how former players react, because you kind of never know how current players are going to react. There are going to be guys who think things against Al-Shaair on other teams, and they're going to be his own teammates who are going to rush to defend him. That's just natural. But former players, especially recent former players, I find to be pretty unbiased, and it's not acceptable. I think, speaking of former players, I think the Ryan Clark calling him out was pot calling the kettle black, but neither here nor there. The immediate reaction between a lot of former players was, hey, there are a lot of ways you could have avoided that. There are a lot of reasons you shouldn't have done that. This is a guy who's got a history with this kind of thing. You mentioned the thing earlier this season. I'll go back a few seasons. Tom Brady's last or second to last year in the league with the Bucks. Al-Shaair was with the Niners, and there was a sack on Brady where Al-Shaair choked out Tom Brady, grabbed him by the neck, under the helmet above the pads, which is a really hard thing to do if you're not trying to in football. So just very weird behavior. The apology is great to see, like good that he did that. I'm sure someone
He's trying to
told
lessen the
him.
blow of whatever suspension is coming.
Well, I think that it speaks volumes that it came out Monday morning rather than Sunday night. Like I think someone who weren't pressured into posting that kind of thing, or someone who felt true remorse, immediately responds and outwardly shows that they feel remorse. But at the end of the day, the NFL's not going to suspend him for more than 3 games. They should. Like, that's a Vontez Burfict-esque hit.
Yeah.
You saw him get suspended for the remainder of seasons.
Yep.
I don't know. It's tough.
Matt Eberflus was fired for this amazingly bad display of clock management in the Bears' Thanksgiving Day loss to the Detroit Lions. And you know what? I will give the Bears some credit. I will give the Bears some credit for this, because a lot of times teams will stick to their guns. They don't want to pay a guy to sit on the beach a few extra games, whatever you want to say. Let him finish out the season. This was and we see this all the time in sports. This was a fireable offense to have your team mismanage the final, seconds of that game in Detroit, a game that was winnable. You've had 3 games in a row that were winnable for this team. I have no problem with the Bears firing Matt Eberflus. I have zero sympathy for him. His reaction after the game, basically saying, "Oh no, it was part of the plan." I mean, if he had fallen on his sword, maybe it buys him the rest of the season and he gets fired at the end of the year. But his reaction to how badly this thing was mismanaged, they had no choice, Sam.
It is the first coach in the 103-year history of the Chicago Bears that has been fired midseason. That's how bad it was. He is the first one. I talked about this earlier, maybe last month now in November, a couple of weeks ago, about why the Bears wouldn't fire him midseason. And I don't think anyone foresaw this, because everything that was kind of around him getting fired before was, you're not putting the right guys in the right places and you're not game planning right. This was straight up, you can't do it on the sidelines now. So we're done. I think this is interesting. I got to slip it in real quick.
Yeah, sure. Since
Lovie Smith was fired following his 10-6 season, Mark Trestman went 13-19 in 2 seasons. John Fox went 14-34. Matt Nagy went 34-31. Matt Eberflus went 14-32. The Bears are a lost organization.
But all it takes, as the Houston Texans showed us, by hiring the right coach, all it takes is hiring the right guy.
It's true.
And there's going to be plenty of those guys out there in this offseason. We're coming back with more Sports Wrap. Odds and ends are next. All right, getting set to put the wraps on this baby for a Monday. Tuesday, we'll have leftovers from the weekend that was. If you have not done so yet, make sure to check out the Sports Wrap with Jason Page podcast, available on all your favorite podcasting platforms, Spotify, Google Play, or now YouTube podcasts, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, TuneIn, Odyssey, Amazon, you name it, we are on all of them. The Sports Wrap with Jason Page Substack is back this week. We took last week off being on the road. Insider betting picks from Sam Yarnell, cooked up on that Substack. Also clips from the show and a whole bunch more. All right, Sam Yarnell, without any further delay, time for some odds and ends. Odds and ends, the passing of a legend. Lou Carnesecca, the former Titan of St. John's basketball, passing away at the age of 99. When you talk about the Big East and Big East basketball, there are a few names from a coaching standpoint that are top of mind for you. You'll always think about a Lou Carnesecca at the top of that list. John Thompson, Jim Calhoun. And I'm talking about the building blocks of the Big East from a coaching standpoint. Jim Boeheim also being a part of that list. you don't have a Big East that is really the envy of college basketball for so many years and decades without Lou Carnesecca, a figure that loomed in a positive way over that St. John's program for so many years, passing away just shy of his 100th birthday. Rest in peace. All right, Browns and Broncos, Sam Yarnell, the Monday Night Football game tonight. I think there's the potential for some fireworks there. I think this is going to be a fun game. Cleveland plus 6.5, plus 230 on the money line. 41.5 is your total. How you feeling, Sam Yarnell?
I got no clue what to do with this game.
Oh, come on.
No,
You're the
because
Prince of Picks.
you could see a world where Cleveland defense steps up against a Bo Nix who's riding high as a rookie but learns a lesson in this game and the game goes under because the Browns win it, I don't know, 17-10. And then there's also a world where, the Broncos come out and smash the Browns offense, or the Browns defense, excuse me. The Browns offense rides Jameis Winston. Jameis throws for 300 yards. It turns into a gong show, and, the Broncos win it, I don't know, 35-28, something like that. So, I could see this game going so many different ways. That's why, from a side and total perspective, I'll stay away. I might look at Bo Nix to go over his passing prop. It's pretty low. I don't know, Jason. From a betting perspective, this game does not make a ton of sense to me.
Jaden Daniels did a lot to kind of calm the waters on the Rookie of the Year conversation yesterday with the 3-touchdown, 1 interception performance, and Washington being able to get a victory after losing a few games in a row. But Bo Nix, with a big showing in prime time, owning the stage tonight, could narrow that gap again some when it comes to Rookie of the Year. I would keep an eye on that, and I like to watch Bo Nix tonight. And look, say this about the Broncos. And again, we talk about fortunes of franchises. The Bears are a mess. The Broncos were in trouble for so long, couldn't find their quarterback. They got their guy in Bo Nix, and I'm excited to watch him in prime time tonight.
I just want to say this with regard to Rookie of the Year.
Mm-hmm.
If the other side of that coin, right, and Bo Nix struggles against this Browns defense and Jaden Daniels regresses to what he was over the last 3 weeks for the rest of the season, I'm telling you, do not write off Brock Bowers in this race. We know that they like to give this award to pass catchers. I see 12-1 at some houses right now.
Yeah,
still.
that's what I said. I said 12-1.
So Brock Bowers, from a fantasy perspective even, which I think when you're talking about these awards has a lot to do with, player of the year, rookie of the year kind of thing. Brock Bowers has been the best tight end in football. And that's with George Kittle having played one more game. Brock Bowers has been the best tight end in football so far this season. And he's a rookie in a bad offense. We need to start giving that kid a few more flowers than we do, because Brock Bowers has been elite this season, and he doesn't even score.
I'll give you one. Bo Nix plus 25 yards at plus 140. I like that one. He's done a nice job on the ground. I'll look at that one tonight.
Oh,
no,
25 rushing yards.
25 rushing yards.
Yeah,
25 rushing yards. Sorry. Bo Nix plus 40 rushing yards at plus 430. Maybe a little sprinkle there. Just saying. Just saying. Look at him on the ground. He's been surprisingly sneaky good running the football this year. So just wanted to float those two your way.
I might take a sprinkle on Bo Nix and Jameis Winston to combine for 550 passing yards at plus 490.
That's not bad. I like that.
I think there's a real world where the Browns defense struggles traveling west at altitude in a night game. Jameis Winston, those deep balls, they just float a little bit higher and land right in the receiver's arms. I could see it.
I'll take the Browns plus 6.5. It's going to do it for us. Thanks to Bill Bender. Sam, We'll see you back here tomorrow. More sports wrap then. Have a good one.